Good afternoon. Today is September 2nd, 2013. It's Labor Day. You're joining us for the LaRouche Policy Committee discussion. We have 5 members of the Policy Committee joining us over Skype video. Bill Roberts, Mike Steagall, Rachel Brown, Dave Christie, and Keisha Rogers. And I'm joined in the studio by Diane Sayer and by Mr. LaRouche.
Well, we have a real situation on our hands. This thing is not going to work, what's being done now. What is done by the Kerry is really slopped it up. Kerry apparently has been moving on Obama, and Obama, who was shaken heavily when confronted by the military, or top military, it has now seemed to have been boosted up again by Kerry's role, or sort of shaming him into something or other. And this is not going to work at all. But let's see what we get from various reactions. I think what we're getting from the field out there is extremely important at this time.
Sure.
Well, I can just say we got a report. I got a report on my way here this morning from our organizers who are at the largest Labor Day parade in the state, and they're finding elected officials and confronting them on the Syria situation and Glass-Steagall. Governor Christie, who's with Obama and probably waiting for his marching orders, had no comment on this, although he specifically did defend Obama's bombing of Libya for 250 days, because I was at a town hall meeting where he did that. Then one of the congressmen who has been really acting kind of goofy lately was too busy trying to figure out how to look into the television camera that was interviewing him. But the state legislators that they met, interestingly, one who had been very supportive on Glass-Steagall in the past and said, oh, but LaRouche, this time he was prepared to hear from LaRouche. He wanted the material on Syria. He was opposed to the war. And another state rep was adamantly opposed to launching strikes. So from a small sample of elected officials in New Jersey, both federal and state, except for the governor, who is an Obama clone, just doesn't quite look like him. But
Clown, you mean?
Yeah. Except for that, they are quite opposed to this action, and I think that is widely the sentiment across all political layers.
Yes.
And I mean, I would say that the performance by Kerry, as you're referencing, is the most disgusting type of wartime propaganda. But the influence of General Dempsey and the leading members of the military obviously has undermined Obama's what he envisioned, which was that he was already going to be bombing Syria by Wednesday or Thursday of last week. And now we're into Monday of this week. The Congress is now scheduled to debate what this issue is, and with what we already saw in the British Parliament, you can be sure that Obama is not getting his way in the type of way that this time last week he envisioned he was going to be already in the middle of another war in Syria.
I think we also have an indication of what Obama's position is going to be under direction. They're going to try to pull something off. They've decided they would. First of all, the Joint Chiefs really gave them a rough time, and now they've tried to bounce back with Kerry's role, and this thing is going to bounce back and forth. I don't think there's any certainty yet at this point. I would say yes, the attitude of the population is no, but who knows who's going to orchestrate it.
Right. Well, I think that's why this impeachment question is so critical, because it's not, and I could just hear, because I know people, I have family members who, no matter what Obama does, think that it's someone else or he did it, and I could hear the logic, well, it's so good he's agreed to go to the Congress. And that's where we come in. We really have to disabuse people of their delusions that there can be any trust that anything good will happen with this guy in office. He is not trustworthy.
Yep. Well, that's nor is Kerry. Kerry is more notorious than he is, the president, because the president at least has some degree of conscience. He gets a shame factor showing. Huh? Kerry has no shame whatsoever. He's a complete prostitute.
Well, and remember, his qualification, so-called, for the job of Secretary of State was that he was the chief apologist for the illegal Libya invasion.
Yeah.
So that he's playing the exact same role again here.
Except we have the evidence is all to the contrary to that fact.
Mm-hmm.
There is no actual evidence, solid evidence, to support the president's position, or Kerry's for that matter.
Right.
And therefore, we are stuck with responsibility for organizing a more effective support for what the Congress is going to be doing. They have to be strengthened. We have to give them more examples of what has to be done. And especially what we're doing from the basement operation now is crucial. I think that what we did, we changed the basement picture profile, which was, I think, is useful. It's going to be difficult to manage because they're flipping back and forth these positions. But I think the fact of the matter is we have to concentrate on is what we're getting out of the basement. Where are we going? That's the one thing we have, a picture of where the United States is going to go.
Yeah.
And the alternative to the crap that's going on now. You have to pose the alternative clearly, otherwise you don't have any grip on the situation.
Right.
Well, I think. Oh, I was just going to make a point on the fact that alternative. I just go back, Lynn, to what you had put forward in October 2011, immediately after the death of Gaddafi, when you said that, look, they're going to move into Syria and Iran. And if you look at this entire encirclement process with what has now come to be known as the air-sea battle, that this thing is going to war. And just as a side note, I think there was the other element to this, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is sort of the economic encirclement of Asia, particularly of China. But this is part of the full-throated war agenda. But in terms of the response, particularly from the Russians, you had the proposal within a month of your warning. Actually, I think it was the next month, was the proposal to go with the Strategic Defense of the Earth policy, a revival of your SDI, and then, of course, the expansion of dealing with the threats from asteroids and so forth. And I think that's a clear example that you can't ever just simply run some kind of anti-war operation. You have to flank it, and you have to flank it with a sense of where should mankind be going. Why in the hell should we be sitting here queued off on a World War III strategy when the future for humanity lies in Arctic development, in the thermonuclear fusion science driver program, which plays directly into the space exploration, directly into this defense policy from the asteroids. But I just think it's notable that the immediate reaction was, dear God, we're queued off on World War III. And then this Russian proposal, had come around the SDE. So that's the way you always have to think. It's for the future and to not get sucked into the tragedy of the present.
I think the thing you have to look at mainly is what is going to happen from Wall Street. Wall Street is the one factor here which is really desperately struggling to try to pull something off. And the way they went after me after the California event, which is when they began to move in this direction, indicates that that's the issue we have to deal with. Now, therefore, the point is what we have to do is we have to attack them in the flank, the obvious flank, that we have the evidence. Now, and what we're putting out is the Trans-Pacific region, what we're doing now with the basement and otherwise. This is the key. In other words, the thing we were doing what I pushed was, let's change the subject, because the tendency is to people to talk about accepting the opinion as it's out there now. And the opinion out there now was not worth anything. There was nothing being proposed which was actually going to solve the economic crisis. Right. So what freaked them out is when we went with an economic alternative. Because that's what is not being done. That's what's not done effectively by our own teams, really. Now, what we have now, from the basement operation, what we put into place, we've started it. So therefore, what we have to concentrate on is the basement operation. And what we have now is something that will work, but we've got to put everything behind it. We can say what we say, but the substance is now what we should say about what the economic policy is, which is required. And that's where we get the greatest weakness. We get the weakness from some of our younger people out there in the sticks and so forth. They don't get it, and we're not doing enough effort. What we've done now with the basement operation, and what's extending to that, and the changes in our program right now. These are excellent things, but we've got to get that image across, because you're just talking about same old in terms of policy. You're not going to have any weapon to go against the Wall Street crowd. If you have the alternative to Wall Street, which is precisely that, is the economic policy, that's the thing that can win. Because if you can't come up with something new, something that is, has no competition for what they're thinking, what they're saying. They're saying, this is the situation. Mm-hmm. We got to accept the situation. That means the following. Because if you have not proposed an alternative, which is our alternative right now, which is coming out of the basement, that's how this thing happened. We got into discussions in the basement and kicking this around. We began after about a week of discussion. We came to the point that we're going full steam ahead with this alternative. That is the only thing that will bring us victory. And we have to concentrate on that theme now, because nothing else can carry the ball. Other things can, as supplements to that, can help. So we have to treat what we were talking about before as supplements. But the main thing is for the program of the economy, the economic, and to say we have not had any progress in the economy since the death of John F. Kennedy. No net, because he was, what remained of his and his influence was all we've had, really. We went with the SDI and so forth. That's there still. But you've got to get the SDI, you can use it, but you have to get it in the right way. You have to get the economic implication of the SDI. And that's, I think, where we ought to put our attention at this time.
Well, I know that what we're doing with the reports that are coming from the basement is sort of a full saturation effect of not only the proposal in a narrow sense, but looking at all of the implications of a nuclear-driven, fusion-oriented development program for the entire Pacific Basin. And as you've said, if you take not only the NWAPA program from the Mississippi, which is inclusive of Detroit and the rest of the United States, but then you bridge that across the Bering Straits into what China is doing, because now China has a fundamental existential question at its doorstep. How are they going to transition from a system which may have worked as an external market up till now, but is not going to be sustainable into the future? How are they going to change their economic program necessarily along Hamiltonian lines in the same way and in parallel to the way that we're doing it here in the United States?
Well, you're going to get a lot of people, the Greenies, for example, are going to resent that very strongly. Good. But what you have to do is tell them, well, you guys have got nothing coming. You're finished. The Green Program is finished. The Green Program is in the way of any recovery of the United States economy and the world economy in general also. Mm-hmm. So you've got to dump the Green Program, because otherwise you're going to you're doomed. And that's, of course, the Queen's intention. The Queen's intention is to have a program which results in a reduction of the human population of the planet from 7 billion people to about 1, as fast as she can do it. And you have to put the thing about the murder aspect of it. The Queen wants to kill you. I think she maybe get to kill the Greens first. Do you think she might kill the Greens first? No, this is where we have to be really on the ball and get this thing across, because they're going to fight back. No, this is terrible. This is terrible. So, well, you guys are finished. You may think that you're going to defeat us, but if you try that, you're finished. You're among the first to go.
One of the things.
Go ahead. That's what I'm just saying. That's the way I think we have to go now.
One of the things in Sacramento. Oh, go ahead. One of the things in Sacramento that has been obviously the bankers are panicked, and we've got to crush these guys, and we'll do a good job of that over the next week here. But one of the things that shows us a sense of what we can accomplish, and we're getting this in the field as well. But 2 of the top aides that we're working with, they're 29 years old, and they get a sense. We had a discussion with one of them on Thursday. This post-Kennedy era, it's done. That paradigm is done. One way or the other, it's going to have to change. And there's a sense that it'll change around certain political lines, like you see around the NSA and these kinds of things. But the fundamental question is, what are we actually going to do? And they get a sense of it from the Glass-Steagall. And with this report, you can't, because you can talk about going to nuclear power and destroying the Greens, but when you put it in a kind of concrete policy terms, and it's a whole development program that reaches across countries, across oceans, down into Mexico, then all of a sudden you get a different kind of discussion. A different kind of imagination starts to work upon a generation which is already beginning to realize, like you get with Edward Snowden. He's now 30. So it's the same kind of thing we're getting. And in the field, you know, what's interesting, we had a discussion yesterday, there are reactions not just to the policy orientation, but people are now directly responding to the question of, what's your life worth? I mean, the tension is so high in the population, so many people are against this war, and they just don't understand really where the driving force is coming from. That but they do respond to then that the one thing they can do is act upon what they know is right, what's truthful, that to act for the betterment of the next generations and for the future. And so we're getting direct responses on that in the field, and I think we have to just take advantage of it, because that's the human response to this crisis.
Just to echo that, I was going to make a similar point in terms of the response we've been getting, but definitely there isn't a whole lot of need or point to go into the details of the lies. We basically just say this whole Syria thing is a fraud. I mean, you really shouldn't do any credibility to this story by even discussing it. It's so insane. So no one is really believing this. We're getting Democrats and so-called conservatives coming up on the question of Syria. That's what's drawing them in to realize that something has to be done now. This thing is really insane. So it really has backfired on Obama. What he was, you know, whatever the full cause of his insanity was, this has created the condition where he has absolutely zero support. He's totally alone. He's done the stupidest thing he could ever possibly do. Not that it's his idea, but this has backfired and has created the condition where we have a new situation. We do. Congress reacted on a constitutional principle in response to what we've been doing out there. This was not the same thing as Libya. They had a reaction that was necessary because of the work that we're doing. And so you're right. People now are responding to the fact that this is a reaction by an empire, specifically, of course, the British Empire, against progress, against what we've done with Glass-Steagall. And it is those greater conditions of greater arcs of what is needed to be done to determine the direction of society right now that is what people are ready to hear. It's really the only thing that makes sense. This question of a leap for mankind, as opposed to dragging through the ditches forever, ending up like Greece and Spain and these countries that have a collapsing life expectancy. That's where we're headed if we don't change the paradigm. So just the point of a total paradigm shift, as Mike is saying, we've been finding receptivity for that as well in every circle. It really doesn't do any good to appeal to someone based off of their so-called, partisan values, because those things don't mean anything anymore. But it is these real questions of human development which are what are needed to be discussed, and people have an understanding that they do need to be discussed.
Well, I would say this war is a reaction to what has been put forward, which is the rejection of the Copenhagen summit, when the Queen had demanded that the subjects or royal subjects accept the fraud of global warming, shut down their industries, and so on. And so there is a rejection of that. Now, they may not have the deepest sense of how to actually get out of this crisis, which is the thermonuclear driven economy, NWAPA, Arctic development. They may not have this as a crystallized idea, but the reaction to that is coming from this dark age faction, the Anglo-Dutch Saudis. Look at, if you really want to get at what's this war drive, where is it coming from? What was the situation in Libya? What is the backing of these these Al Qaeda cannibals? I think there's actually been some pretty good statements coming out. Kucinich, for example, saying, look, what are we, Al Qaeda's Air Force? Or this statement from a guy in the Navy, who was saying, look, I didn't sign up for the U.S. Navy so that I could fight alongside Al Qaeda, which is what the Syria operation is. And so, I think we just have to be extremely clear what the two paradigms are. You have a world of sovereign nation states based on economic development and progress that somewhat, as Lincoln said, we're at a point now where you can't have half slave, half free. It's going to be one way or the other. And if you look then at what this Al Qaeda Saudi funded, the whole operation that we're seeing in Syria, that's what we're up against. And this goes to this 9/11 question. This goes straight to really the last decade, the paradigm that's been set in since Bush and company, launched these illegal wars on the fact that we were attacked in 9/11. So I think just crystallizing that concept in people's mind that's what we're up against. It's this dark age faction versus a growing consensus that humanity is going to cooperate based on a system of sovereign nations.
Well, one thing on this fusion question, which I was very struck by reading Leona's paper and then Michael Kirsch's paper over the weekend, is she makes the point, I forget who she quotes at the beginning, that if you have nuclear power, it doesn't mean that you're going to use electricity to do the same things that you're doing now, but better, but more efficiently. That what you're doing is you are creating an entirely new platform that we will discover that there are things that we can now do that we didn't even think we wanted to do in the past platform. So that you're actually talking about a total cultural shift to a much higher level of thinking, just as you can imagine when people in the Tennessee Valley thought, why do we need electricity? We're doing perfectly well. We're doing our laundry by hand. Who needs to read a book? We'll just move when the floods come. And so it wasn't a matter of then electricity would run your washing machine or that you had electric light bulbs, but suddenly you had refrigeration, which meant huge things for the farm, or that you could use the light to have the chickens lay eggs more frequently. So you suddenly found you were increasing your productivity by orders of magnitude. And I think that's the idea somehow that we have to convey to people.
Against eccentricity. Don't be a chicken. This is where it's all going to lie. And we have to actually realize that we have to change the way people think. And it's easy to change the way they think because they really don't like the way they think. They don't like the effects of what they think. But they say that we don't have an option.
Right.
And therefore, our problem is to create the option and emphasize the option. And what they've lost sight of is they've lost sight of the fact of what the nature of the human being is. As the Queen, for example, exemplifies, the Queen's psychology exemplifies the bestiality of the Queen's policy. Because she denies and tries to send things back. She tries to reverse the existence of humanity. Huh? So after all, she is a plain killer. But her killer instinct is based on the fact that she's also stupid. Mm-hmm. And she denies the existence of, she's completely an oligarch who's going to sit there and say, oh, we're overpopulated. We have to kill some people now, don't we? And that's the attitude she's taking. And that's what she is. She's the witch with a B. And the problem is that we have most of our people have been conditioned to that kind of outlook, have accepted that outlook. And now they find themselves that everything they thought they had confidence in is being taken away from them. So now they react to the fact that somebody comes up with a different, and say, we don't have to necessarily do that anymore.
Right.
That's where the fight is.
Yeah.
But we've got to get more across. We've got to get this thing more effectively across. And instead of trying to avoid issues, which we could address, which people are doing, they're not bringing something up unless you remind them of it. So and that's the only way we're going to move this. We have to actually, is what we're doing now with the basement operation on this thing. This is exactly what we have to do. You have to raise the point is that mankind is the only species, period, the only species that has a future. And there's a reason for that characteristic, and that's what we have to present and emphasize. And what we've done with the Pacific operation we've done for the basement is crucial for that. But we just have to get this thing in focus.
Yeah, I've been finding recently that the thing that people are most excited about when we're meeting them in the field is the fact that what our organization does effectively is we change the subject. We don't react to events. We're not just now reacting to Obama's, saying he wants to invade Syria. You, Lynn, stated that this was what would happen if Obama's not impeached. And the fact that people are running up to us and saying, can we really stop it? Can we really get him out? And we show them, yes, well, this is what we've been working on, join the fight. And the fact that we've been building this up, not based on an event, but based on an idea of what the dynamic governing the planet is, and then creating the discussion around that, it moves people. It moves people to have confidence in our method. And this product coming out of the basement right now is a really emphatic changing of the subject, because for the reason Diane was mentioning, it's not a discussion of nuclear power or fusion as an idea of bringing back some electricity capacity to revive something that we used to have, but it is the creation of something entirely new, which is a subject matter in a lot of cases that just does not, it's completely outside of the discussion of what economics is as something you can measure in a scalar way. As soon as you even start discussing what the real potential of nuclear power is, it becomes a question of reclaiming land, reviving the agricultural potential of entire areas. I think that's what's really gonna grip people. And I was talking to some elected officials today at the Labor Day parade here in Detroit, and when I told him, look, we have to change the subject. This is not Detroit. This is a national fight, and it has to be addressed at a national level. We have to change the subject in that way. And they were asking me, well, how many federal elected officials want to change the subject in that way? And I told them, I think they want to, but we have to create the discussion. We have to create that discussion now, not wait for it to happen, but to create it. So I think that's sort of a theme.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The response that we're getting is you really find a great awakening in the American population right now, and that awakening is coming especially with the younger generation, who are seeing a sense of real responsibility placed upon them right now. On that generation, I mean, I've gotten, even in the field, I know people have gone to college campuses in the recent period, a generation of the younger people between the ages of 18, 25, 30 years old coming up, and you know, they don't know what to say. They have this sense of just emptiness to what is going on. How are we going to overcome this? How did we let this happen? Why is Obama now moving to take the entire planet into nuclear war? How did we fall into these lies? Why did I go along with this? And they have lots and lots of questions now. And when you give them a sense that they're as human beings, they can actually participate in creating something that they could have never imagined, that they never thought they would be able to participate in breaking this president, breaking this oligarchy, and fighting for the most advanced projects and developments of mankind that the world has ever known. You find that people are really responding in a way that it just uplifts their spirits. And, you know, we're getting young people coming up to the table who just say, sign me up, you know, especially ones who are in the military, who have a sense of what's going on, people who, of minority background, who were gung-ho for Obama, who are saying, I can't believe this is going on. What have we done? Where do I sign up? And I think that the more that, as Bill said, you're right, it's that we change the subject and give people a sense that the progress of mankind is going to be our ultimate weapon in finally and once and for all defeating this empire, putting this empire, this queen, this policy of population reduction, of war, destruction, limits to growth out of existence, and actually once again freeing mankind to participate in that intended progress, which was the foundation and has always been the foundation of our republic and of sovereign nation states throughout the world. And so what the basement is doing right now and what our organization is doing is totally revolutionary to the thinking of the population and to what we have accepted in society for quite some time. And this is, I think, this is already causing an explosion in the population that we should really be prepared for, because I think that there's a real great revolution in the works right now, great revolution in the making.
I mean, what's sort of coming across from all of this to me is that you really are talking about something which is on the level of a complete paradigm shift, and something which you haven't seen in this magnitude since the death of Kennedy. But at that point, it was in one direction. Now you're talking about something in another, but it's not yet defined. And a lot of it is it's negative. It's rejecting this, rejecting that. And what's interesting is that it's not on one issue. It's not just the NSA spying. It's not just the war. There is a revival of the idea that you have to operate according to the United States Constitution. But it's sort of all-inclusive, but it's largely a negation. It's largely a sense we can't sustain ourselves. There is no future under this paradigm. And I think the most critical thing, Lynn, of what you're doing with saying we've got to go into the future, we have to define the future, is that there has to be the positive definition of what this paradigm shift is going to be. And that's the role that we uniquely can play.
Let's take the case of the United States as a historical phenomenon. What has happened is that the development in, especially from Columbus's own efforts, but especially from Massachusetts, while it's functioned up until the 60s. At that point, we had a drive, and people forget that what was done in the Americas from the 60s and that year, that century, that itself changed the world, because Europe, the development of the colonization in the Americas, beginning with Columbus, changed the world because it changed the dynamic of the world. And this was the intention of Nicholas Acusa in doing that and making that proposal. His argument was specifically, if we understand what's wrong with Europe, we realize that the only way we can save Europe from this cycles of slaughter is we have to go across the great oceans, or across some great ocean, and thus by colonizing that part of the world, we are going to change the dynamic of Europe from the real cycling of this process. Now, in the United States, we have deeply embedded in us from many generations of people who's, one or two generations removed from immigration. And this spirit inside the Americans, to the extent that is spread, is still there. And therefore, when we in the United States take leadership, we can get Europe to go along if we do it properly. The problem right now is Europe is destroyed. Europe knows it's been destroyed. They are accepting destruction. They just don't know what to do about it. Yep. And you have in Russia, you have an inkling of a contrary view. Belarus, you have a significant inkling of the same thing. So that what we have now is and you're getting this from Syria in part, despite the whole operation, there is a desire to resist this trend in things, and to a capturing of something which echoes what Europe meant, what the United Americas meant for Europeans. And therefore, we as Americans, particularly North America, the United States in our history, more than any other part of the planet, we represent, embody, when we act like that, we embody what people, the only hope they really have under these kinds of conditions in Africa, in Europe generally, and so forth. So this is the important thing. And when we say we're going to cross the waters and we're going to open up a new dimension for humanity's progress, we're actually touching something which specifically inside the United States has a strong appeal. But people have lost their confidence in saying that. Our job is to tell them to say what they would like to say in terms of effect. They would like to believe that America can be reborn. They like to believe that. But they say, could it happen? I don't think it could happen. When you change that, then you bring out of the American who sees that everything around the world is failing. Europe is a failure, it's a catastrophe, a total catastrophe. There's no hope in the future in Europe, at least in Western and Central Europe. No hope at all. Only we can give them the hope. And that's the problem that Europe represents. It's gone back to the same thing that it was in during the Dark Ages. It's going into a dark age. And they don't have the guts or perspective to change that. We do, and Cusa was right. I don't think most people know about that, but that he was right. He said we must go across the great oceans to find in another territory, another area. We must find a place where we can develop the ideas which we can then bring back to save Europe. And that's exactly what's happened. Cusa was right and successful in what he did. And so this is the dynamic we have to think about. We also have to think about the dynamic of the evolution of mankind. Mankind is the only species that evolves to a higher form. No other species develops to a higher form. They're stuck in whatever they are. And only mankind has the ability to change that. Yeah. And that's what the Queen represents, is you can't do it, you've got to go backwards, you've got to go backwards. And that has been in the past the problem of Europe, the problem of European history, the Roman Empire and so forth. So it's our confidence in understanding that we in the United States have inside our people, or a significant number of them, we have a sense of the feasibility of the future, which is lacking today in Europe, at least in Central and Western Europe. And that's what we have to act on. And don't try other tricks. Don't try other arguments. They won't work. If you try to feed back to Europe the kind of things that they believe in now, you just got to kill them. So you've got to push this across. Stop being stupid, people. We're going to save you. You can have a future again. The colonization in the Americas, in North America, the creation of the United States gave you, in Europe, a chance of living again when you were about to lose everything. And if you look at what happened after Cusa's death, during that whole century and beyond, you saw the horror show that Europe was once again, as before. And Europe cannot survive on its own authority. It can't do that. It has never been able to do that. I mean, Charlemagne was as close to that success as possible. He was only a short couple of decades as a ruler. He did miracles. But then what happened after that? Boom, once he's dead, Europe went back into collapse again. So the point is, Cusa was right. And this is what he was explicit on. And he told his associates before he died, this is what we are going to have to do. And we therefore represent, in the United States, we represent the only force available on this planet which could really turn the tide under the present circumstances. And we have to represent that in what we do and what we say. Otherwise, if we don't represent that, we will not be able to save our own nation. We will not be able to save other nations.
You know, one of the maybe not followers, but successors to the tradition of Cusa, Gottfried Leibniz, who was extremely active in shaping the intellectual domain, not just of Europe, but really of the colonies through penetration into the Massachusetts Bay Colony grouping. But, you know, it's notable that at the same time that was what Leibniz was doing in Europe and the new found land and the Americas, he was also concentrating on affecting in Asia, in China in particular, setting up really what was the sort of the intellectual tradition, which is now somewhat the best intellectual tradition that we see in Eurasia, from Russia to China and so forth. And I think it's notable that here we are, where there's no more lands to go conquer, or no unfound territory where we could go, except for maybe out to space. But of course, we're not going to get out there without dealing with some of the immediate crisis here now. But what we can do is, in effect, sail across the oceans again intellectually and pull out that tradition from Russia, from China. And I think this is where the greatest resonance comes from, the legacy of the Leibniz tradition. And this is where I think, Lynn, you find some of the greatest resonance for your ideas within Asia, from China, India to Russia and so forth. And so in a sense, we are sailing across the oceans again, but colonizing with a conception. And the conception is this grand Pacific alliance that We need these nations to come together around a renaissance of the pushing the frontiers of our knowledge of the universe, of our scientific capabilities, and so forth.
Yeah, that's a fascinating area for me. This is what I really, apart from what I have to do right now in that sense, that's what I'm really concerned about. Because we have a sense of man, and the sense of man that we have is rather silly, because we think of everything in terms of mankind's as characteristics as such, and we don't see that mankind evolved from something which was able to use fire. No other species that we know was ever able to develop its species on the basis of fire. Only mankind has done that. Now, it's more than just discovering fire. It's the content of the meaning of fire has changed and increased. We went through, burning wood, brushed wood. We went to various kinds of chemistry. And the history of chemistry is the history of the evolution of man. That's how we understood it. And therefore, this aspect of mankind, which is lost in recent times, we no longer think of progress. I think Kennedy was one of the lost paragons of progress. And so we lost that sense of progress through what happened with, Truman in particular, is a real wretch. But the point is, we have that available to us. We have to present it. We have to present it. We have to emphasize the truth that mankind is an evolving species. Mankind is the only species in which the individual, if they are on the ball, shall we say, will understand the evolution of man to a higher level without changing his biology, his innate biology. It's pretty much the same thing all the way through. But what's changed is the chemistry that mankind subsists on. And that's what we have to do, change that chemistry. If you're not engaged in progress, you're denying your existence as mankind. You're saying you're just an animal. And that's where that's why I emphasize this approach to this situation. You've got to bring back the fact of this idea. What is human progress? What is the human species? What's its necessity? On what conditions does it depend for survival? What must it do to survive? Well, it must go to thermonuclear fusion. We've gone through all the levels of chemistry we knew before, and we're now going into thermonuclear fusion, and we're talking about matter, antimatter, which were the subjects of the time of Max Planck and Albert Einstein. And we've got to get back to the spirit of Planck and Einstein, among others.
Well, the other fascinating thing about what you were saying about Nicholas of Cusa is that it really teaches you that events in history do not have their origination in the moment. For example, with the American Revolution, everybody always discusses what was the trigger? What was the trigger? What set this off? What caused this to happen? When you forget not only that Benjamin Franklin came directly out of the tradition of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but that the Massachusetts Bay Colony itself never would have been possible without, as you said, Nicholas of Cusa.
Well, let's take the great Christian movement and look at what the Romans did in killing Christians en masse, Right. And what the similar kinds of things, the attempt to corrupt Christianity itself in order to make the Christians behave like Romans. And so that this is the issue. We identify ourselves as having destiny. That's why it's so silly. Just think about what people think about sense perception. They say what they are confident is sense perception. But I know that sense perception is not what we're dependent upon. We're dependent upon the creative powers, the noetic capabilities of the human mind, not on sense perception. And sense perception is not really, how silly it is, we say that we're going to judge the solar system by sense perception on Earth? Are we going to make that argument? It's a nonsense. The essence of man does not lie in a biological characteristic. It lies in a super-biological characteristic, and the fact that only a few people, out of the total population of mankind, only a few so far are actually aware of what the future is. Most people don't know what the future is because they don't experience the making of it in themselves. And the best way we can deal with people is what education is supposed to be of children, is just exactly that. You have to give them the experience of making discoveries of principle. You can't use deduction. The problem of our population in general is, even in the United States and in Europe, they have the deductive approach. They say you don't know what lies beyond what you can see with your sense perception. But in point of fact, every achievement of mankind has been based on a discovery which went beyond anything supplied to them by sense perception as such. It's called creativity, and mankind is the only species that has creativity. What's the proof of it? Well, the proof of it is originally you have, a little fatso down there in South Africa, and he had a neighbor, and the little guy with fatso there, he had a fireplace. And we know that because we can record the fact that Fatso used fire to cook his food, whereas the other monkey next door didn't. And what happened is, as a result of this, that mankind, with his, avoiding the other Fatso, moved ahead by going to higher levels of what we call chemistry, physical chemistry. And mankind evolved by mankind's ability to develop higher forms of physical chemistry. And you look at the whole table of history of mankind, and the biological table, the physical table, is the evolution of mankind by virtue of going to higher degrees of energy flux density, which means in part going to a higher evolution of the periodic table. Mm-hmm. And that's this principle of going into the future rather than commenting on the present. Going into the future is the nature of man's essential characteristics. And mankind is a fool if mankind believes still today that sense perception is the determinant of human reason. It is not. Sense perception is the guarantee of stupidity. It's creation that frees man from the limits of sense perception. Just like with thermonuclear fusion. We cannot save this planet now without the use of thermonuclear fusion. It's not possible. Now, you want to cook in thermonuclear fusion, but it indicates that the table of chemistry, just as simple as a table of chemistry, is moving ahead, always demanding the next level of progress. Absolutely. Yeah. We went, nuclear fission. Well, that was already something that existed, pre-existed. We encountered that, but we didn't merely encounter thermonuclear fusion. We went into areas of which mankind's imagination created by experimental methods, because there's some people like Max Planck and Einstein who, in the 1890s and beyond, typify the essence of humanity with their creative impulses. And that's what we have lost. The fact we educate children, we've educated children in learning how to repeat after me. And how to make new constructions with the same building blocks. Same old blocks, same old things. I went through this in my educational experiences from childhood on, and I always hated this thing. You've got to create the future. You cannot simply pick up habits and copy them. And that's what you have. All these, which used to sicken me, all these children, from younger ages and adolescence and so forth. And they all had this characteristic of stupidity. They were bright people in large part. They showed ingenuity in large part, but they weren't creative. Why weren't they creative? Because they were told that they're not supposed to be creative. They're told that they're supposed to use deduction, and deduction from repeated experiences. And therefore we have people still today who believe in sense perception. Do you think that the sense perception created Earth all by itself? Don't you realize that the universe has evolved? It's gone through much evolution, and we're a part of the revolutionary evolutionary history is in the solar system and beyond. And therefore we are supposed to be creative. Mm-hmm. And most people say you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to read the books, listen to the lessons in the classroom, do as you're told. Huh? And that's what made people stupid, because they closed off was creativity, change. They closed off. Yeah. And say, that's the limitation. That's what I learned in school. That's my limitation. That's where I got my degree in this. I got my position in this. Hmm? And they would say, no, that's the future. But nobody can know the future, is their argument. No one can know the future. When in point of fact that mankind is the only species that can willfully create the future by going to higher levels of chemistries and things of that sort. And that we've despoiled our people by not telling them the truth about themselves. And that's what we have to do now. We have to remind people of what they can already easily know from demonstrated experience, that mankind is a creative being, not simply an animal. And we don't know of anything in the universe which can do what mankind can do. The problem is we don't do it. We accept bad advice, and we don't accept creativity. We call it only entertainment, the imagination, and the imagination as such is rather silly. Unless you're changing something, the imagination ain't worth anything. Mm. I'm sure we can do that. I know you will do that. You're good people. On the right track.
Okay, well, I think by this time next week, we're going to have all the members of the policy committee here in the studio with us. We'll be gathering because of the beginning of the next session of Congress. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys in person very soon. And thanks for joining us today. That's a conclusion to our show.